Hey guys, tonight we're heading into thick Pennsylvania fog, muskets strapped, boots squelching in the mud, and nerves jangling like spurs on a steel floor. You're part of the Union Army, and at your front rides, General John Reynolds, broad-shouldered, eagle-eyed, already a legend to the greenhorns and veterans alike. But here's the catch: he's about to vanish in front of your eyes. No smoke bomb, no trapdoor, no screaming, just gone. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's July 1, 1863. Gettysburg. You're 23 years old. Your socks are wet, your jaws clenched, and the air tastes like ash and old pennies. You follow Reynolds up a ridge just outside the town, past twisted fences and chirping crickets that don't seem to care about human war. The fog is so thick, it's like walking through unbaked bread dough. You barely see the back of the man in front of you. And somewhere in there, it happens. He's just gone. A corporal a few feet away gasps, "General Reynolds," but there's only silence. No gunshot, no scream, no slump of body or tumble from a horse. 1 second, he's riding tall in the saddle, then nothing but mist and the uneasy shuffle of boots. You freeze. Everyone does. Even the horses seem confused. You didn't hear a single shot. But here's the problem. The history books all swear Reynolds died that morning, shot in the neck by a Confederate sniper, barely minutes into the Battle of Gettysburg. Officers say his body was recovered, buried, honored, but the men who were there, the ones in the mist, some told a different story. One said he never saw the general fall, just turned around and he was gone. Another swore Reynolds was riding beside him one moment, and the next. His horse was empty, and one poor soul insisted the general had whispered something, "Don't follow," before vanishing into fog so thick it felt alive. The whole day becomes a blur of chaos and cannon smoke. You charge the field anyway, bullets whining past like mosquitoes with vendettas, limbs numb from adrenaline. But something gnaws at the back of your brain. Where did Reynolds go? Later that night, camped beside a creek that smells like copper and burnt leaves, rumors spread faster than the firelight. Some say Confederates dragged the body off. Others say the man buried wasn't him, but one sergeant, clutching a Bible and shaking like a leaf, says this: he didn't die. He stepped out, just stepped out. Historians still argue whether Reynolds died instantly from a Confederate bullet or whether something stranger happened. There's no photograph of his corpse, no confirmed eyewitness, just secondhand stories, hearsay, and a lot of men who looked too pale when they swore they'd seen him vanish. And then there's the diary. Decades later, a dusty little journal turns up in a Pennsylvania attic. Belonged to a soldier in Reynolds's division. He wrote, "The general passed me again at dusk, hours after they said he was dead. He touched my shoulder. He was cold, creepy, yes, but also consistent with a weird little fringe tidbit back then. Battlefield disappearances weren't exactly rare, especially in fog. Men lost their bearings, ran the wrong way, or ended up in enemy camps by accident. Some even deserted, but this was a general, a decorated officer. He wouldn't just vanish, would he? You try to forget about it. Really? You do. But the next morning, the same corporal who shouted Reynolds's name, he's found staring blankly at the woods. Doesn't speak for days. Just keeps whispering. He's still out there. The army moves on, the war churns forward, and Reynolds, well, officially, he's buried. But the whispers never stop. They twist like fog through tents, through letters home, through the dreams of soldiers who swear they felt a presence on the ridge long after he'd supposedly died. Your boots dry out. Your uniform stiffens with salt and old sweat. You fight more battles. But Gettysburg sticks with you not because of the horror, but because of that one moment, that one disappearance that never made sense. A glitch in the war. A mystery you can't unsee. But hey, maybe he did die that day. Maybe the history books are right. Maybe memory's just a foggy lens. Or maybe we're only just beginning to uncover what really happened on that hill. And speaking of beginnings, you ready to find out who Reynolds really was? Before the battlefield claimed him, you rewind the clock. It's a crisp October morning in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The year is 1820. You're standing in front of a modest red brick house, white trim around the windows, chimney puffing like it's got stories of its own. Inside, a baby wails, and that baby is John Fulton Reynolds. You wouldn't guess it from the lungs on him, but this squirmy little bundle will grow up to command tens of thousands of soldiers. Well, for a while, you blink and he's older. Tall, serious, already obsessed with structure and discipline. He's not the class clown. He's the one making sure the chalk lines are straight on the playground. At 20, he gets a letter that changes everything West Point. It's basically the Hogwarts for military minds in America, except there's more math, less magic, and a lot more yelling. You're with him now, pacing the long stone halls of West Point, boots echoing off the floor. The year is 1837. You pass men who'll soon become legends, future Civil War generals like Ulysses S., Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman. And even though Reynolds doesn't top the class, he graduates 26th out of 52. He's sharp, steady, and already has that air of quiet authority. One instructor writes, he doesn't need to shout. The room gets quieter when he walks in. Fast forward, the Mexican-American War explodes in the 1840s. You're there with Reynolds in the sun-bleached hills of Buena Vista, the air crackling with musket fire and Spanish curses. This is his first taste of real battle. He's cool under pressure, dodging cannon blasts like he's been doing this his whole life. He earns a brevet promotion for bravery, basically a gold star from the army that says, "This guy's got it." Back home, he's not loud about his service. He's not one for bragging. He prefers chess to whiskey, letters to speeches. That quiet fire, though it keeps drawing him back to the battlefield. And then comes the big one. It's 1861. Fort Sumter falls. Civil War breaks out like a fever, and you know what's coming. The Union needs officers, and Reynolds, now in his early 40s, is plucked from his post and tossed right into the inferno. You march beside him through the muddy roads of Virginia, across hills soaked with rain and gunpowder. He takes command during the Peninsula Campaign, leading troops with a kind of calm that rattles even the most hardened soldiers. One enlisted man writes home, he rode like he wasn't afraid of bullets, only late orders. At the Battle of Gaines's Mill, Reynolds is captured, yes. Even legends get caught. Confederate soldiers take him prisoner, but they treat him well. He's exchanged a few weeks later, and he returns to his command with that same stone-faced calm. No big speeches, just let's keep going. It's around this time people start whispering about him. Not just respect something deeper, almost reverence. He refuses cushy political assignments. He doesn't chase promotions. He's offered command of the entire Army of the Potomac and turns it down. Let that sink in. Historians still argue whether it was humility, strategy, or quiet disdain for D.C. Politics. Maybe he saw the rot under the marble, or maybe, just maybe, he knew where he needed to be out there, in the field, where the fog creeps and the bullets hum like angry bees. Here's a fringe tidbit for you, Reynolds. Despite his military gravitas, was deathly afraid of public speaking. Hated it. Would rather dodge cannonballs than give a toast. In a letter to his sister, he once joked, "If you ask me to speak, I shall retreat." Classic Reynolds, but privately, he was soft-spoken and loyal. He wrote letters to his family, especially to a woman named Kate Hewitt. Their courtship was quiet and possibly secret. Some say they were engaged. Others believe she was simply a dear friend. Either way, after his supposed death, she joined a convent and never spoke of him again. Now that smells like heartbreak. You keep walking in his footsteps through Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. The air's always thick with smoke and indecision. And Reynolds is always there, steadying the ship, keeping his men from dissolving into panic. He doesn't lead from the rear. He's right up front, sometimes too far up front, according to his aides. And it's that recklessness or bravery that brings us to Gettysburg. June rolls into July. The summer's heavy with tension. Lee's army is moving north, fast. You're with Reynolds as he rides to Gettysburg, ahead of most of the Union army. He's been given command of the left wing, nearly 30,000 men. That's like being told, "Here, hold this earthquake." And he rides fast, too fast, some say, without waiting for full intel, without all the reinforcements. But that's Reynolds. He believes speed will win the day. As you near Gettysburg, the hills roll beneath you like green shoulders, shrugging off the weight of war. The morning air is cool, but something about it feels off. You see Reynolds glance toward the fog beyond the ridgeline, his eyes narrowing. He knows the next hours will determine the fate of the entire campaign. Maybe the war itself. He rides forward anyway, and you follow, boots pounding dirt, heart thudding like a drum in your ears. Because when a man like John Reynolds tells you to move, you don't ask why. But you're still thinking about it. Aren't you that moment in the mist? The vanishing act. The general who should have died on that ridge, but didn't leave behind a single clean answer. Yeah, you're not alone. July 1st, 1863. The morning sun is still just a whisper above the horizon. You're trudging behind Reynolds on the approach to Gettysburg, the dew-soaked grass brushing your legs, the town's steeples poking out like fingers through the fog. His horse moves with intent, no showmanship, just momentum. The general's jaw is set like stone. He's not here to wait. You hear it before you see it, the thump of artillery echoing through the hills like distant thunder. Union cavalry has already clashed with Confederate forces northwest of the town. Reynolds doesn't pause. He rides into the fray, fast. You grip your rifle tighter. This isn't a scouting mission, it's a full engagement. Reynolds dismounts, walks among the Iron Brigade, his favorite troops. Mostly men from Wisconsin and Indiana, and issues orders like he's dealing cards. Calm, clear, quick, take the woods, anchor the line, hold until reinforcements arrive. You can hear it in his voice, no panic, just purpose. And then, the moment. He's standing at the edge of Herbst Woods, beneath a tall tree, sword in hand, pointing toward the enemy's position. His eyes flick left toward a flutter of movement. Then, crack. Some say it was a sharpshooter from a Confederate perch. Others whisper it was a stray volley. But the bullet, if there was one, rips through the morning like a whip crack. Reynolds stiffens, stumbles, then drops. Or so the official story goes. You and a dozen others see him fall, or you think you do. But when you rush forward, he's gone. Not collapsed, not bleeding out, just missing. The horse is still there. Saddle empty, reins dangling. A private swears he saw Reynolds step behind a tree and not come back out. You search the brush, calling his name. There's no answer, just the sound of birds startled from the branches above. And here's where the record gets fuzzy. The Army later claims they found his body, that it was taken to a nearby barn, then moved to Lancaster, that he was buried with honors. But you never see the body, and neither do most of the men who fought beside him that morning. One stretcher bearer reports he transported a corpse with a mustache and a major's insignia, not a general. Another nurse at the field hospital writes in her journal, "They told us it was Reynolds, but he looked too young, too slight." Historians still argue whether he died instantly or later that day, whether it was a clean shot to the neck or a more brutal wound. One account claims he spoke a few final words. Another insists he never said a thing. But here's the thing you can't shake. You were right there. And what you saw doesn't match the tale the officers scribbled into the official report. And you're not alone. Other soldiers whisper that they saw a man in a Union general's coat walking into the woods after the supposed moment of death. One even says he spoke to him briefly before realizing the man's collar was clean. Too clean for someone in a firefight. There's a mainstream fact buried in all this Reynolds was the highest-ranking Union officer to die on the field at Gettysburg. That's in every textbook. He's hailed as a hero who held the left flank, made quick decisions, and bought precious time for the rest of the Union Army to arrive. But here's your sensory anchor. Imagine the smell of gunpowder hanging low, like burnt coffee mixed with metal. You crouch in the underbrush, eyes darting between trees. Men shout, cannons roar, and yet your mind keeps circling back to the image or lack of one. The general who vanished. The Iron Brigade fights like madmen. They push the Confederates back through the woods. Dead leaves crunch underfoot. Tree bark explodes in splinters. Smoke curls around you like phantom limbs. Through it all, the absence of Reynolds looms larger than any presence could. Later that night, you huddle near a fire, blood still sticky on your hands, and listen as a chaplain reads the list of the fallen. Major General John F. Reynolds killed in action, Gettysburg. He doesn't look up as he says it, but your sergeant, sitting nearby, stares hard at the flames and mutters, "That ain't how I remember it." The Army needs a martyr. Reynolds fits. Young, brave, humble, unmarried, clean narrative. There's a ceremony, an elegant tomb, portraits, monuments. History moves on, but the story sticks in your teeth like a popcorn kernel. Here's a fringe tidbit that pops up in obscure memoirs and letters. A Confederate soldier captured days later claims a Union general passed through their lines alone, dazed, without a hat. He wasn't interrogated, just disappeared again before anyone got a name. Even stranger, that story was removed from the soldier's memoir before publication. A few old copies still exist, but they're rare and fragile, and half the ink is faded like someone tried to wash the past out of history. You spend the rest of the war chasing shadows. Reynolds appears in your dreams, sometimes not dead, but distant, standing just beyond reach, never saying anything, just watching, and when the war ends and peace limps into the world again, you visit his grave in Lancaster. You stare at the stone. Simple, clean, final, but you don't feel closure. You feel watched, and maybe that's because this story isn't done unraveling. You think you've moved on. You really do, but years later, you're walking the quiet streets of Lancaster, again Reynolds' hometown, and something stirs. The air smells of coal smoke and rain-washed cobblestones. It's evening. The gas lamps flicker like they've forgotten how to burn steady. You pass the old churchyard where he's supposedly buried, the headstone standing alone, proud. Too proud, maybe, a flicker in the corner of your eye. A man in uniform, tall, straight-backed, with a slouch hat pulled low, just for a second, and then gone. You shake it off, but you're not alone. You're at a local tavern later, sipping flat cider, and an old man beside you leans in and says, unprovoked, "You ever hear the story about the general who wasn't buried where they said, you pause?" He grins like he's testing you. Reynolds, that grave's just for show. Mark my words. You ask him what he means. He chuckles and taps his temple. Some men die, some men disappear, and some men are made to disappear. You don't sleep well that night. And this is where the real rabbit hole opens. It starts with a letter. You're visiting the local historical society one rainy afternoon, the kind of place where the floors squeak louder than the staff, and you come across a dusty bundle of correspondence marked Reynolds Personal. It's mostly mundane. Schedules, requests, army minutiae, but one letter stops you cold. It's addressed to Kate Hewitt, dated months after Gettysburg, and signed simply J. The contents are strange vague, poetic, not at all what you'd expect from a military man. The trees are thicker here. No uniforms, no drums, only breath and bark and shadows. He never mentions Gettysburg by name, never references the war directly, but there's something about it, the cadence, the restraint that feels deeply, eerily familiar. You show it to the archivist. She frowns and says it's probably a forgery. That many widows received anonymous letters during and after the war. Wishful thinking, collective grief. She's polite but dismissive. Historians still argue whether the letter's real or whether it's just one of those post-war fictions, like Lincoln's Lost Diary or Grant's second memoir. But handwriting analysts, quietly consulted by curious souls like yourself, say the style matches Reynolds's known writing, especially the way he forms his capital R with a sharp, almost defiant little hook. And then comes the photograph. It surfaces in the 1880s, in a tiny hamlet in Colorado. A bearded man in a Union coat, much older, face weathered like saddle leather, standing outside a cabin in the snow. Locals only call him the Major. He never gives a real name. He keeps to himself, carves wood animals, and disappears into the forest for weeks at a time. You hold the photos side by side with a known portrait of Reynolds. The resemblance is unnerving. The angle of the jaws, the tilt of the brow, even the stubborn crease in the brow. Could be coincidence, or it could be something more. A descendant of the Iron Brigade later claims his grandfather swore he saw Reynolds alive in Chicago, years after the war, walking with a limp, buying a newspaper when the old man approached him. The figure turned, smiled, and said, "Tell no one." That phrase becomes a whisper across multiple accounts. Now here's your quirky tidbit. There's a cryptid rumor, yes, we're going there, that Gettysburg is haunted not by ghosts, but by time loops. A small cadre of Civil War reenactors swear that on certain foggy mornings, a Union officer appears near Herbst Woods, then vanishes. Always the same uniform, same face. No reenactor claims to play him. Some say it's just a clever prank. Others swear it's something stranger. You want one more sensory detail, that wooded ridge where he disappeared still dense. Even now smells like wet leaves and old iron, like blood that forgot how to dry. Hikers sometimes report hearing hoofbeats there, even though no horses have passed that way in decades. And always, that phrase, "tell no one." You start to collect the stories. A bartender in Savannah remembers an old, silent man with war medals who paid in Union scrip. A railroad worker swears he shared a smoke with a soldier near the Alleghenies who looked like he'd stepped out of a painting. Even in Washington, a senator once muttered during a private dinner, "Reynolds didn't die. He escaped. Some say he was helped. Helped that opens another door." Theories abound. Some whisper of a secret society within the Union Army, tasked with preserving military genius in case the war dragged on forever. Sounds ridiculous until you consider the dossiers that vanished after the Battle of Gettysburg, or the sudden retirement of officers close to Reynolds's inner circle. Even Edwin Stanton, Lincoln's Secretary of War, ordered a memo sealed regarding Reynolds's personal effects. It was unsealed in 1932 and found to be empty. You keep walking, deeper into the forest of questions. Maybe Reynolds saw something that day, something he wasn't supposed to see. Or maybe he was already planning to disappear. Maybe Kate knew. Maybe that's why she vanished into the convent so quickly. No letters, no interviews, just silence. And then there's the last journal entry you find, dated July 3rd, 1863, found in the belongings of an army surgeon who never returned from the war. It reads, "Saw him again today. Same coat, no blood. He looked at me as if I were the one who had died. Your candle flickers. Your breath catches. And just like that, the general vanishes again. You don't tell anyone at first. Who would believe you? But once you start looking, the signs keep surfacing faint, fleeting, like footprints in a downpour. You comb through war records, letters, odd eyewitness accounts from both Union and Confederate sides, always hoping to find some common thread. And then, finally, you do. It's a name, not Reynolds, not even close. It's Jeremiah Root, a minor mention in a post-war census, living on the edge of the Adirondacks in 1866. Age unknown, occupation scribe, place of birth left blank. Nothing too unusual until you find the accompanying sketch. It's crude, ink on thin, yellowed paper, but the man in the drawing has the same sharp cheekbones, the same downward tilted brows, the same 1,000-yard stare you've seen in every known photo of John Reynolds. It's him, or it's someone pretending very, very hard not to be him. And here's where the details start to go cold and uncanny. The census taker who logged Jeremiah Root left a note in the margin of his own records. Man speaks perfect English, formal, but says nothing when asked about the war. Always wears gloves. Left hand appears stiff. Your fingers freeze. That last part matters. You recall a story from a Union orderly who treated Reynolds briefly in Chancellorsville, not for a wound, but a sprain in the left wrist. A riding accident, the kind of injury you'd forget unless, apparently, you were looking for it. But even more bizarre when you cross-reference the names in that same Adirondack census. Something leaps out. One of Root's neighbors is listed as K. Hewitt. Coincidence? You want to think so. You hope it is, but you already know better. Historians still argue whether Reynolds and Kate Hewitt were officially engaged. The only proof is a small ring she reportedly wore on a chain, and a few guarded mentions in her private diary. She never married. She never gave interviews. She entered a convent, quietly and refused to speak of Reynolds again. But if she was living upstate under an alias in the same area where a man who looked exactly like her supposed fiancé also appeared, well, suddenly the story turns sepia-toned and quiet, romantic, tragic, but loaded with more questions than closure. Here's your mainstream fact. Though Reynolds really did turn down the command of the entire Army of the Potomac just weeks before Gettysburg, that job went to George Meade instead. But why Reynolds declined remains unclear. Some claim he didn't want the political baggage. Others suggest he sensed something bigger coming, something that required him to be in motion, not on paper. Now lean into this next part, because it's one of the strangest, most haunting elements yet. You meet a woman, a retired school teacher in Vermont, who tells you about her grandmother's story. She says her grandmother, as a child, used to see a tall man in a blue coat walking the edge of their apple orchard at dusk. He never came close, just stood by the fence line, silent, watching. One day, the girl approached. The man tipped his hat and said only, "You must be brave. The world's not done with its wars." That girl grew up believing she'd spoken with a ghost. She never knew who he was. But the teacher hands you an old tintype photo from a family trunk. And there he is again, older, silver at the temples, but unmistakable. The general who vanished? There's a sensory detail you won't forget. The photo smells faintly of pipe tobacco and dry leather. You hold it too long. The teacher notices. "You've seen him before," she says. You don't answer. She just nods. Now here's your fringe tidbit in the Smithsonian archives. Locked away in a rarely accessed folio is a single page from a Union military journal. It's dated July 5th, 1863, 2 days after Reynolds' supposed death. It simply reads, Cole H. confirms sighting. Not a ghost, flesh and voice. Same man, orders unclear. Await next message. That entry was never published. You only see it by mistake through a forgotten scan someone uploaded without tags. Buried in a digital folder marked miscellaneous dispatches. You sit back, goosebumps, palms damp, because now you're not just chasing myths. You're standing inside one. Imagine this. You're back at Gettysburg on a humid July morning. The cicadas buzzing so loud it sounds like static in your ears. You walk the edge of Herbst Woods. Tourists snap selfies nearby, but you're not interested in monuments or brochures. You're listening, and you hear it. A voice, low, commanding. Familiar, form up, keep your eyes west. No one else reacts, only you. And then it's gone. You remember an old joke from Camp the Civil War never ended. It just took a coffee break. But now it doesn't feel funny. It feels prophetic. You begin to wonder, did Reynolds fake his death? Was he rescued? Did some secret branch of the military spiral him away to avoid capture, preserve his intellect? Or, as the more conspiratorial types suggest, train him for something beyond the battlefield? Or was it all an illusion, a misremembered moment in the fog of war, polished by grief and guilt until it gleamed with unnatural luster? Even the most grounded accounts leave cracks. You read diary after diary, testimony after testimony. Some align, others contradict. But one refrain keeps recurring, whispered like a prayer or a warning. I saw him after, and one more. He looked right at me, like I wasn't supposed to be there. You remember that now, and suddenly you realize this mystery isn't really about proving whether Reynolds lived or died. It's about that moment on the battlefield, in the woods, beneath the oak tree when something inexplicable happened, and everyone agreed not to question it too loudly. Because maybe history isn't just written by the victors. Maybe it's also quietly edited by the survivors. And Reynolds, he may have simply slipped between the pages. You wake up one morning, and it's all you can think about. Reynolds, the general who vanished. Not in myth, but maybe in plain sight. You've got too many breadcrumbs now to dismiss it as folklore, but too few to prove anything. And that's what makes it unbearable. So you double down. You book a room in Gettysburg for a week. The creaky kind with floral wallpaper and complimentary ghost tour coupons at the front desk. You spend your days walking the battlefield alone, from Seminary Ridge to the edge of McPherson Woods. You count steps, time distances, sit in the same spot where the general supposedly fell, under an oak tree twisted by time and storms. You sit there until your legs go numb. And on the fourth day, it happens. You're crouched by the monument. The brass plaque is cold to the touch, its engraving worn down by decades of rain and fingers. A tour group ambles past, their guide rattling off dates and quotes. But as they move on, one boy lingers, maybe 10 years old. He's staring not at the monument, but at the woods beyond. You follow his gaze, and then you see it. A flicker between the trees. A figure just barely visible. Not in full, just an outline. Blue coat, slouched hat, right hand on his sword hilt. Head slightly bowed like he's reading something on the ground. But the moment you blink, he's gone. You turn to the boy. Did you see? But he just nods, eyes wide. He waved at me that night, back at the inn. You ask the owner if people ever report strange sightings on the battlefield. He nods. All the time, he says. But most just say it's the fog playing tricks. Or reenactors, even though no reenactors are allowed out there after dark. You ask if anyone ever reports seeing the same figure. Oh, sure, he replies. Always a Union officer. Tall, kind of serious looking. Shows up by Herbst Woods or near the Lutheran Seminary. People always describe him the same way, like he doesn't belong to their time. You press him, has anyone tried to identify the figure? He shrugs. Some say it's Reynolds. Others say it's just a soldier spirit looking for his unit. But then he lowers his voice. There's a file in the borough archives, started back in the 20s. Unofficial, kept by town clerks. Accounts from locals who've seen him. Some go back to the 1880s. Next morning, you're there when the archives open. They don't advertise this file, but after some quiet persistence and a promise to treat it with respect, the clerk slides a thin folder your way. It's wrapped in wax paper, held together by twine. Inside, over a dozen handwritten accounts. A postman, 1893, claims he saw a solitary Union officer standing at dawn by the west fence, then walking straight into the woods and disappearing. A widow, 1910, said she watched the same man place a hand on her fence post, then vanish. A schoolteacher, 1956, insists she passed a man in full Union dress, saluting toward the field, before he stepped behind a tree and was gone. Every account describes him in the same way, tall, reserved, quiet, and never interacting except once. In 1937, a Boy Scout troop got lost after dark during a campout. The leader reported that a gentleman in old-fashioned uniform guided them out of the woods, back to safety. When thanked, he said only, "Stay together. Don't forget each other." Later, the scout described the man's eyes as sad, but kind. Historians still argue whether any of these reports have merit. Most are waved off as embellishments, wishful retellings, or a town's desperate attempt to keep its ghosts alive for the tourist dollar. But you can't shake the consistency. And there's another story, one that doesn't show up in books. In 1972, a Park Service employee, long since retired, claimed he saw a man who matched Reynolds' appearance enter the McPherson barn. No big deal, except it was locked and hadn't been opened that day. The officer inside ran out, thinking a trespasser had slipped in, but the barn was empty. No footprints, no sound, just a lingering scent of pipe smoke. Sensory detail again. Pipe smoke, tobacco, a quiet tell, but maybe the strangest clue of all, a note, found behind the Reynolds monument during a routine cleaning in 1991. Tucked beneath the stone in a small, wax-sealed bottle, it simply read, "Thank you for remembering." He never stopped walking. No name, no date. It was logged, filed, then forgotten, until you dig it back up. You ask a handwriting analyst to compare it to that letter from earlier, the one to Kate Hewitt. The slant, the capital R, the curving T's. The analyst can't be sure, but she leans in and whispers, if it's not the same person, it's someone who wanted very badly to sound like him. And that opens a softer, more wistful theory. What if Reynolds did die, but the idea of him didn't? What if grief, longing, and myth combined into something strong enough to leave a mark? A shared hallucination, a collective echo, the same way people still swear they see Lincoln pacing in the White House, or Amelia Earhart standing barefoot on island shores in dreams. Maybe Reynolds is just that, a story that keeps walking because we're not ready to let it stop. Or maybe it's him still keeping watch. Because here's the thing. Every time someone describes seeing him, they say the same thing. He looks like he's waiting for something. You lie in bed that night, unable to sleep. The fan hums softly in the background. Shadows stretch across the ceiling like slow smoke. And you wonder, not for the first time, what it would take for a man to step out of history. Not to run away, but to slip between the cracks of war, duty, and legend, and walk somewhere quieter. And if he did, How long would he wait before anyone truly noticed? You start dreaming about him. Not every night, just enough to make you pause every time your boots hit gravel near a battlefield trail. Enough to make you jump a little when a crow caws from a fence post, or when the wind snaps a dry branch overhead. In the dreams, he never speaks. He stands at a distance, always in the uniform, always watching. Once, he nods. Once, he turns and walks into the fog, and you wake up before he disappears. So now you do what anyone obsessed does. You start talking to people, historians, archivists, Civil War buffs in dusty bookstores, retired rangers, haunted tour guides who start off mocking you but go real quiet when you say, "I'm not joking." One even says, "There's a whisper circle." You blink. What people who've seen him? They don't post online. Too many trolls, but they email each other, pass stories around. Photos, even photos. He shrugs, a few blurry. Always at dusk, nothing solid, but you manage to get into the circle. And what you find, well, it changes things. You get an email from a woman in Ohio who claims her grandfather told her about a mysterious soldier who showed up at their family farm in 1865, helped harvest hay for a week, said little, paid in gold coins, wore gloves the whole time, said he was waiting for something to end, disappeared before breakfast one morning, left behind a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's probably nothing, right? Except on the inside cover, he'd written a name J.F. Reynolds, and then you get another message. This one from a man in North Carolina. He's got a family Bible passed down from an ancestor who fought at Gettysburg. Scribbled in the margins next to Psalm 91 are notes he lives. Changed name, new uniform. Watches, you ask. Is there a name? He replies they called him Mr. Root. That again, Jeremiah Root. Same alias, different decade, different state, different story. Mainstream historical fact. The average Civil War soldier marched about 15 to 20 miles a day, often with just hardtack and coffee to sustain them. They carried gear, muskets, tents, everything. But what they couldn't carry was the weight of the war once they left it behind. That's the emotional piece you start to feel now. Because suddenly, this isn't about proving whether Reynolds survived. It's about understanding why he might have vanished. And maybe here's the answer. Because he couldn't do it anymore. Because after Antietam, after Fredericksburg, after the endless names and faces that passed beneath his command, maybe the most heroic thing he could do wasn't to die in battle, but to choose a quiet, invisible life. A life where he could still protect, still guide, but without the weight of the title, the body, the memory. Historians still argue whether Reynolds had the temperament to be invisible. He was a commanding presence, notoriously disciplined, and deeply loyal to the cause. But he also hated politics, avoided self-promotion, once said, "I would rather serve in silence than lead with fanfare." You think about that. A man who craved service, not spotlight. Maybe the perfect candidate for disappearing. Fringe tidbit for tonight. There's a story unpublished from a woman named Elise Hartman, who in the 1890s ran a convalescence home for aging veterans in upstate New York. In one of her journals, she describes a visitor who came every spring, paid cash, asked no questions, brought books and tobacco, sat with the residents for hours, wore a gray wool coat, spoke like a schoolmaster, and signed the guest book only once. J. Root. Here's the kicker. He always brought the same book for the Veterans' Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You're probably thinking by now, okay, but what's the big reveal? What's the moment where someone finally corners him, demands answers? But that's just it. There isn't one. That's the open debate part of the story, whether the absence of finality is the mystery's greatest strength or its greatest flaw. Because the deeper you go, the more it feels like Reynolds doesn't want to be found, like he only appears to those who need to see him. A soldier, a child, a wanderer, a scout, and always when they're lost. You stand again beneath the Reynolds Monument in Gettysburg. This time, near dusk, tourists have cleared out. The sun bleeds orange through the trees. You listen, wait, and after a few minutes, you feel it. A pressure, not fear, not cold, just a gentle stillness, like the world is pausing for you to make a choice. You whisper, "Are you still here?" And for just a second, the leaves rustle in the oaks like they're answering. You don't see him, but you don't need to, because now you believe it's not about seeing Reynolds. It's about being seen. And so you turn to leave, the gravel crunching softly under your feet. A warm breeze tugs at your jacket. Somewhere, a bird sings low in the branches, like a note meant only for you. Behind you, the woods are quiet, but you swear, you really swear, you hear footsteps that aren't yours. Not chasing, just walking. Always walking. You tell yourself this is the last time. One final trip to Gettysburg. Just a weekend, no notes, no camera, no interviews. You've already got the story, or at least the outline of one, but something keeps pulling you back, like a tune you can't finish or a name on the tip of your tongue. You're not chasing proof anymore. You're chasing peace. And peace, as it turns out, is harder to find than ghosts. You spend Saturday walking the cemetery. Not the famous part with the Lincoln address plaque, but the older, quieter side. The part with crumbling stones, names half erased by rain and lichen. You count more unknowns than knowns, each one a life with no headline, no statue, just grass and silence. You sit beneath a cedar tree and eat a sandwich you don't really taste. The air smells of cut grass and distant rain, and you wonder how many soldiers like Reynolds never got a monument. How many walked off the battlefield, changed their names, changed their fates, and lived on in lives nobody ever wrote about. And here's the part you can't shake. What if the real miracle wasn't the disappearance, but the fact that he could let go? Because you're starting to realize that's the real tension here. Not did he vanish, but why did we need him too? We build these myths, vanishing generals, ghostly protectors, silent watchers, because we don't want the story to end. We need to believe that the best of us might still be out there, walking beside us. That someone strong, principled, and brave didn't fall, but chose instead to keep watch from the margins. And you think about how Reynolds died, officially shot at the very start of Gettysburg, before the battle really began. How some say he never saw it coming. Others say he was directing troops. Still others claim he was conferring with a scout in a grove. Historians still argue about the exact moment, about the angle of the shot, the position of his horse, the minute on the clock, and none of that matters anymore, because what matters now is what his story became, what people needed it to become. A man who might have died, or might have slipped away to protect quietly, forever. Quirky tidbit for you every July 1st at sunrise. A handful of Gettysburg locals leave wildflowers beneath his monument. Not roses, not flags. Wildflowers, unmarked, unclaimed. No one knows exactly who started the tradition, but it's been happening since the 1940s. A woman once left a note beside her bouquet. It said, "You still matter. We still see you. You walk the edge of the battlefield one last time. Past the ridge, through the wood. You pause near a stone wall. The cicadas drone like static on an old radio. You place your palm on the warm rock and close your eyes. And this time, you don't ask anything. You just listen, and that's when it hits you. Maybe the real haunting isn't a ghost. Maybe it's a question. What do you do with a story that doesn't want to end?" The answer: you walk away from it gently. You leave space for wonder. You let it breathe in the silence. Because some men weren't meant to be solved, only remembered, and just as you're about to turn back, the wind kicks up through the trees. It smells faintly of cedar, dust, and pipe smoke. You smile, then you whisper not to anyone around you, but to the story itself. "Thank you for walking with me. Let's let the rest of the world fade out for a while." The war drum's quiet. The footsteps fall still. The last of the gunpowder clears from the sky, drifting upward like fog into a blanket of stars. You can almost hear the creak of saddle leather, the rustle of dry leaves under boots, and the hush of a voice that hasn't spoken aloud in 160 years. Now, there's nothing left but the hush. You've walked miles tonight through history, myth, and the uncertain ground in between. Whether Reynolds vanished into legend or simply became one, it doesn't really matter, because you carried his story forward, gave it space, and sometimes that's enough. So breathe deeply now. In and out, let your limbs get heavy. Let the air soften around you. Somewhere, far off, the stars are wheeling slowly over the Pennsylvania fields. Somewhere, a soldier leans against a stone wall, just watching. No orders, no war, just peace. And maybe tonight, as you drift off, you'll walk those fields too. Maybe you'll nod to him in passing. And maybe just maybe he'll nod back. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.